is Fran Halsall, talking on behalf of Sheffood. Are you with us, Fran?
I am indeed, yes.
Fantastic. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Can I just ask James to make it possible for me to share my screen, please?
No problem.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, hang on one second while hopefully everyone can see this. In fact, what I'm going to do is, because my slides go off to the right hand side, I'm just going to minimize me because nobody really needs to see me talking. It's all good. So I'm here to talk about scaling up low carbon food infrastructure in Sheffield. So low carbon, synonymous with the word agroecology, organic, sustainable. There's various different ways of describing this, but we've recently produced a paper with Sheffood, which I co-wrote with Gareth, on the subject of low carbon food infrastructure in Sheffield. If you're interested in reading it, then we can make sure you get a link later. So just a quick shout out to say some of the good work that Sheffood's actually been involved in. We've just submitted a Sustainable Food Places Bronze Award submission, which means it will hopefully, fingers crossed we're going to get this. We've had some good noises so far, and that recognises the good work that's being done in the city already around sustainable food production. And we're also a member of 2 national programmes, which I won't go into detail about now, but I urge you to have a look at what those programmes are delivering. So that's the Urban Agriculture Consortium and the Fringe Farming Project, and Sheffield is involved in both of them, which is quite a coup for the city. So a great time to be talking about scaling up food production. So what is the value of urban agriculture for Sheffield? Well, if we look at it on a more regional basis, across the entirety of South Yorkshire, if we exclude the very 2 largest farms because they're not at all representative of the scale of production in the region, then there's actually 99 acres of agroecological production. You can call that nature-friendly farming if that suits you better. These 99 acres represent a turnover of £8 million, employing 100 staff and 2,000 volunteers. Interestingly enough, more than 50% of this production is actually taking place in community gardens. So you've heard from Healy City Farm already, they've got their satellite sites, so that represents quite a lot of that area. Typically, community gardens are around about an acre or less, and community gardens are set up for a variety of reasons, and high yield of food or high yield of crops is not necessarily the main motivation. It might be that they have more of a focus on well-being, or maybe even offering horticultural therapy. There's all sorts of different styles, different purposes that meet community needs. But interestingly, there is a production technique which we call spin farming or small plot intensive farming, which is shows that a very small patch of land can actually be incredibly productive. So it relies on lots of human energy and resourceful cropping strategies. So using the same bed multiple times a year to produce maybe 3 crops if you're particularly productive, possibly even more if you're really good at it. And this means that you've got the most efficient use of land possible. So if you compare that to a rural situation where perhaps land isn't quite so, there is more land to work with, there's no urgency to make that land quite as productive in this sense. So it's not to be confused with intensive farming that you might see across Britain. It's small plot intensive farming. And it's this level of agriculture which is quite interesting from an urban point of view. Now, it's not to say that rural farming or farming on the edges of the city isn't relevant, because it really is. But if we think of this from trying to change the food system in a really visible way, then if we have neighbourhood level market gardens, that brings food to where the majority of people live. And it has to be done on small plots because those are the only sites that are available in an urban situation, because obviously land is in high demand. So it's really important, if we want to actually make some substantial structural change to how we value food and how importantly we value the people that produce food, then food has to have a role on a neighbourhood level. I think it's the fact that food happens elsewhere. So either it happens in what we tend to call the countryside, or it happens in another country entirely, that we don't really have this relationship with it. This is one of the reasons that so many people lack the basic skills to feed themselves, because we've been, obviously, as a wealthy country, we've managed to export that problem elsewhere. So what would happen if we actually made attempts to expand local agroecological production? Well, first and foremost, it would represent an easy boost to the circular economy of the city and also the region. And of course, if we reduce our imports, we're going to increase food security. But it's also important, we're not just gaining food security by having fewer imports, we're also taking back responsibility for production. Because again, if you export your food production to the other parts of the globe, you might be talking about areas where there's very little water available, or they're having to clear native forest in order to make room for food. This is not an acceptable situation anymore. So we have to think of, even though we're talking about developing food production locally, we have to think of it in this global context. And of course, food that's produced along nature-friendly or agroecological principles will have a lower carbon footprint. And also, if you manage the soil in a sustainable way, you actually lock carbon into the soil instead of releasing it, because the soil is no longer eroding and you are using cover crops and other things, as Doug suggested in the previous discussion. So if we take neighbourhood gardens or neighbourhood level community gardens as an example, how are we going to equip these sites with the skilled growers that they require? So this is a really important question to actually dwell on, because the median age of farmers in this country is actually 60 years old. So when they retire, so presumably within the next 10 years, who's going to feed us then? Because it's not necessarily their children, because they're not going into farming. So we've got two issues combined here. It's a case of, this is a huge opportunity for that land that's currently managed probably largely on a non-organic basis to actually be brought into agroecological production. However, if farmers aren't passing on skills to their children, and we're not highlighting the issue of the lack of skills to turn the vision into reality, then what are we going to do? Where are these growers going to come from? So by thinking about existing community gardens as more like an incubator, this could be a place where people with an amateur interest in growing actually become apprentices. You could consider them potentially as a recruitment ground for further education. This could be in a more formal sense by doing national qualifications for colleges, or it could be working alongside professional growers, a kind of farmer to farmer apprenticeship or mentorship model. So if we follow that path, we've got a ready recruitment ground. And one of the reasons I feel this is quite an advantageous way to actually approach the issue is because community gardens are a very inclusive environment. So I've been involved in a couple. I run the Foodworks farm, and I can assure you that anybody can come, regardless of their current skill level, learn something each time, and also have a good supportive experience, because very nice people generally get involved in growing. So it provides this supportive setting of growing, which most people won't have, because if you're trying to grow your own veg at home and you don't know why it's going wrong, as is often the case, then you get disillusioned and you might not do it again. So it's all about bringing people in so that they can experience the joy of growing your own food and getting it to its first harvest and picking it. That is such a powerful thing to do. And of course, while this is happening, you're empowering people with employable skills. And this is so important because we have created a mythology in this country that says that farm workers are actually unskilled labourers, and it couldn't be further from the truth. And particularly when you're talking about an agroecological approach, where you have to pay attention to the ecosystem, you've got to know about soils, you've got to kind of micromanage your vegetables, because you are thinking about them, protecting them in a much more you have to find lots of different solutions, because you're not using herbicides and you're not using pesticides. So you have to have quite a level of education in order to be able to do this. So if we can put neighbourhood level gardens as a strategy to actually allow the city to have a different experience of food, then hopefully we will start attracting various people into these sites, and that will start to change our relationship with food. Now, it has to be said, is that time coming? Yeah, okay. Not everyone has the opportunity to volunteer. So this is a really important part at the moment, because I recognise that not everyone's in a position to offer their time for free. So I think it's really important to have a joined up approach to this, where we can say that those hours that are given should be recognised towards existing unemployment schemes. We perhaps should be offering students opportunities and giving them credits for the work that they do, or a similar kind of system like time banking for people who just generally come in, and those the hours spent working for your community, growing food for your neighbour, can be translated into some other useful asset for you. And if we manage to arrange
Thank
all
you,
this,
Fran.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
okay, no problem. Yeah, it's all about culture change. That's the only thing I wanted to say, Gareth. If we can just get to the point where we can do all these things, then we'll change our culture. Okay, thank you.
Amazing. Again, what a fantastic way to wrap up a session there. It's all about culture change.